Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is the multifamily recycling workshop for property managers and caretakers. And today, myself, Emily Barker from the City of St. Louis Park, along with my colleague Caitlin Steinberg at Hennepin County, will be presenting and sharing with you about our ordinances and a number of resources we have to help you with helping your residents recycle better. As I mentioned, we're going to talk today about our county ordinances, our city and county ordinances, and how they impact multifamily buildings. We're going to talk about what can be recycled, some common problems beyond contamination, and then resources to help your residents recycle better. We will take questions at the end. If you have them at any point, though, please submit them in the chat box, and we will try to address those if we see them. Otherwise, we'll address those at the end. Today, the main thing I want to set this in the context of is a shared goal, or a goal that we hope is shared, and that is that we would like to reduce trash overall, but not at the expense of quality recycling. And what I mean by that is, it's great to get as much out of the garbage as we can, but if we start throwing in all the other random things, what we call wish cycling, the plastic bags and random other items, that this does not help improve recycling. And in those cases, it's better to throw those items in the trash instead of hoping that someone down the line will take them out. I want to acknowledge up front that multifamily definitely has some challenges that are different than single family homes. One of the big ones is the high turnover. The turnover in a multifamily building is significantly greater than it is in single family homes, because you have a high number of renters. Now, of course, this is different between condos where you are often owner occupied and situations where folks are renting, but the turnover in general is higher. And you have people move from all over. They might be coming from elsewhere in the Twin Cities, or they might be coming from a different state or a different country. And you have a lot of different knowledge that varies in your residence. The knowledge varies partly because of that, and also because the education that's provided by different properties really varies. In many, it's just the signs, if there are signs on the dumpster. In others, it's pretty extensive and they offer additional information throughout the year. Signage also varies greatly. We'll talk about the requirements we have for that, but the signage is just all over the place when it comes to multifamily buildings. The fact that recycling containers are shared makes it difficult to provide feedback directly to residents. And this is obviously very different than if you live in a single family home and you have your own individual cart. If you put something in that shouldn't be there, the hauler can let you know right away by putting a tag or something else on your container to let you know. And that's really different in multifamily buildings. If there aren't cameras, it's almost impossible to know who put particular items in your dumpster. Sometimes the issue is that there's inadequate service capacity. We'll talk about that more too. This means dumpsters are too small or not serviced often enough. And this can become a challenge when folks aren't sure and they see one dumpster is full, and so they just put their stuff in whatever dumpster has room. And adding capacity for either recycling or trash can help address that. There are definitely language barriers. Multifamily properties, depending on where you are, can have a higher percentage of folks who either don't speak English or are learning English, and also a higher number of children that may be involved with recycling tasks. And so this can be a challenge, and we'll talk about that with our signing. And then if we're honest, there is definitely apathy. Some folks just don't care, like in our single family programs. And that can be a hard thing to address. I'll be honest, it is definitely not an easy one to address, but we hope that some of the tips we provide today help you address a number of the other issues and think about ways that maybe you can help motivate your residents. Here in St. Louis Park, we made some amendments to our solid waste ordinance a couple of years ago, and we already had a multifamily recycling ordinance in place. It required that you had recycling, but didn't have a whole lot of detail. And we decided to improve recycling for our multifamily residents, who make up about 40% of the city population, that we wanted to have some requirements that would help ensure they had enough recycling and that signage was useful. The first big change that we made was we added a minimum recycling requirement. And basically what this is that it requires there's 20 gallons of recycling per unit per week. And I have detailed slides on each of these, so I'm going to go and wait for that. The recycling location was clarified, talking about where recycling needs to be in proximity to trash. Education was added, a requirement that residents be provided with information every year. And signage was added, signage requirements, both for you as properties, if you have chutes and containers that are yours, and for the haulers. So if you are only using the signage provided by the hauler on their dumpster, then that requirement is on them. When we look at the minimum weekly service capacity requirement, this is required for all buildings with 5 units or more, and those are the ones that are defined as multifamily. I have my little equation here to convert for those of you who are wondering what the 20 gallons a unit means for your building. If you are one that is the 5 to 8 units, that would mean that you'd need one 96-gallon cart. It would be great if you had more, but that would be the minimum, serviced on a weekly basis. If you've got 10 or more units, then we need to look at larger service. The 1 cubic yard dumpster is actually not really a dumpster size that's served, but 1 cubic yard is basically 2 of those smaller carts. Most often, service is offered in 4, 6, or 8 yard dumpsters for multifamily and can be serviced on a number of different times, whether it's once a week or multiple times a week. And we don't really care how you meet this 20 gallons per unit requirement. As I mentioned, you can have larger containers or increase the frequency of your collection. I will note, though, that generally speaking, if you have room, larger containers that are serviced less frequently cost less. And that's because the cost to get the truck on the road and have the driver in the seat is really where the bulk of the cost comes from, and not from the size of the container. That's something to consider if you do have space, especially if you have service outside, if your dumpsters are stored outside. For location, this requirement isn't super defined, but the way that we talk about it is that it needs to be in close proximity to trash. This one, your dumpsters or your containers are outside, is pretty easy to meet. Usually they're in the same enclosure or the same side of the building, and it can be fairly straightforward to meet that. If it's indoors, this can really depend, especially if you are managing an older building, it can be trickier. If possible, we want those containers in the same room. You can see a photograph here of a property that was doing that. Now, of course, this is not always an option. Not everybody loves this because aesthetically, maybe it doesn't look as clean, but if you have room, this is what the requirement is. It needs to be in the same space. If it is not possible, and we recognize that in situations, the room might be too small and then you might be in violation of fire code if you were to have containers in there, we will work with you to create an alternative plan and approve that. And essentially we haven't actually gone through an official process. We've talked through a few properties on this approach, but basically what this would mean is you would need to have very clear signage in that trash room about where recycling is, how to find it, what floor it's on. And the other thing that we have found is for properties that only have recycling, say down in a garage, is that if they don't have at least a small trash can next to it, it becomes a receptacle for all of the walk-by trash when people are going to their cars, they've got a coffee cup. Therefore, we require or highly recommend that you have a small trash, just a regular garbage can, next to that recycling dumpster. And that can help cut down on those random little items that people are putting in when they're walking to their vehicles or going outside to the garage. If this is the case and your building needs to have kind of this alternative approach, please do reach out to me. I want to make sure that we have that kind of recorded, so then if there's ever an inspection, it's very clear what the expectation is. For education, the requirement is on the responsible party, and that is most likely yourself who's watching this video or this webinar. This is property management. Sometimes it's the condo association or an on-site caretaker. Whoever it is that's responsible for typically communicating with your residents about trash and recycling, they would be the ones, or if there's somebody who communicates with them on lease related things, they would be the responsible party. But someone from your facility or your company needs to provide education materials either in print or electronic form. Now, the requirements are a couple of things. The first one is that it needs to be provided to tenants within 30 days of move-in. Ideally, you either have it on the kitchen counter when they move in and it's right there when they get there, or you hand it to them with their lease. When they sign that lease, you hand them the recycling. Either way, it needs to be within that first month. And that way they have the information. We realize that that can be a chaotic time for residents, but they have that information from the very beginning. And then you need to provide it annually to all tenants. The requirement is specifically that it be provided within the first quarter, so by March 31st. This is sort of on the honor system in terms of when exactly you do it. That would be the preference, is that it be in the first kind of quarter of the year, so we look forward to the year. But we understand if it happens in April, then that's okay too. The other thing is that it needs to be provided to all tenants within 30 days of a change in acceptable materials. This doesn't happen all that often, but it could. Say if for some reason our programs stopped accepting glass, like in some parts of the country. I don't see that happening anytime soon, but if that did and all of a sudden we weren't accepting glass, that would be something you need to let your residents know about right away. Again, that's pretty uncommon. One thing I do want to note here, and Caitlin will discuss in more detail, is that there are multiple language options from Hennepin County. So if you manage a property that has Somali speakers, Hmong, Spanish, Russian, we have access to all of those options through Hennepin County, and we link to the digital versions of those on our website, the city's website, which I will provide later in the presentation. For signage, the basic requirements are listed here. We have a minimum size. Caitlin will talk about how their size requirements are slightly different. Recycling symbols, so the chasing arrows that people are used to seeing. Pictures are really important. This goes back to the language barriers issue, where sometimes if folks are coming to this and they either cannot read English at all or struggle to, if we only have text-heavy signage, it is very difficult for folks to engage in that in a meaningful way. Therefore, pictures are part of the requirement. And then we do want to see at least the word recycle or recycling, mixed recycling, something along those lines to indicate that it is in fact recycling. Here are a couple of examples of signage here in St. Louis Park. On the left are a couple where they have incorporated signage from the county. As you can see, they include that word recycling as well as images, the recycling chasing arrows, and they're a pretty good size. That dumpster one is definitely bigger than 8 by 11, and it takes up and makes a pretty good visual presentation to the residents. On the right, these ones have relied only on hauler provided signage, which again, this requirement is actually on the haulers, and we have worked with them to get permission to be able to sticker their dumpsters, so we can, the city can do that, or you can do that. All of the haulers that provide service to multifamily in St. Louis Park have said that that is okay. But as you can see here, these lists are just not useful. Frankly, I would not stand there most days and see and read through that. The images are much easier to connect with. And so the lists aren't bad, but they do need to be complemented with images if you're going to use them. The other issue here is that, again, the words are up on the top. It says recycling, but there's no images, very minimal images. The one good thing about the ones on the right is that they are fairly large, so that is good. All right, at this time, I am going to transfer the presentation to Caitlin, and she is going to share about Hennepin County Recycling Ordinance.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caitlin Steinberg. I work for Hennepin County, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our ordinance requirements. Let me just pull up PowerPoint as well. Okay, so yeah, our ordinance is called Ordinance 13. This is actually a recycling ordinance that's been in effect for a very long time, but just recently, in 2018, we had new changes that were approved and went into effect of actually just earlier this year, January 1. And I do want to point out that even though these changes are effective now, We are focusing more on educating about these changes, making sure properties are aware, and any enforcement or more rigid enforcement is going to be coming, looking at more 2021 instead of 2020. So I'm just going to go over, this is just a general overview of our requirements, and then I will cover them in more depth in a second. But our requirements are pretty similar to St. Louis Parks. You're going to hear a lot of overlap between the two ordinances. So we also have the education requirement saying that property managers or the responsible parties, and it explains it, must provide written information about recycling when tenants move in, and then every year after that. We also have containers and labeling requirements. So we ask that containers are conveniently located, meaning that it should be as easy as finding the trash dumpster to find the recycling dumpster or carts for residents. One shouldn't be hidden behind another or in a less accessible location. We ask for adequate service. So if you're looking at St. Louis Park's minimum capacity requirement, that'll help you meet this adequate service requirement for us as well. But this is to help ensure that we don't see consistently overflowing carts or consistently you have a much bigger dumpster than you need maybe and you're paying extra. So maybe you want to right size those containers so you are getting exactly what you need. And then appropriately labeling containers. And I'll go into a little more of what that looks like for our ordinance as well. So our recycling education requirement is, we have the basics. You have to provide recycling information every year at move-in and at move-in. And that, you can kind of see in the picture that person's holding a little guide. But that guide is kind of step one of our recycling requirement. We also ask that information include information on what to do with household hazardous waste, so your tenants know what to do with those items when they have them, and bulky waste disposal, which can help you prevent those bulky items from ending up in the trash or recycling or just hanging out outside, leaning up against the dumpster, as well as the location of the recycling bins in your property. So we do have recycling guides, and we have a few other educational handouts. One's called the How to Get Rid of It Guide. One is called our recycling, multifamily recycling brochure. That hits all of these points. It's got the recycling information, hazardous waste information, and we have a separate guide for bulky waste disposal. So we're not necessarily asking that you create these educational pieces. You can absolutely just use the ones that we provide. The one thing that you would be responsible for making sure your tenants know that you would have to figure out how to disperse that information is making sure everybody knows where their recycling containers are in the building. And our next requirement is about collection containers. So I talked about things need to be convenient to access. So these two containers are right next to each other. I know that sometimes, especially outdoor collection areas, it can get a little tricky, but you can always work with your hauler to figure out what is the best way for you to place these containers so that both your residents can access them and your hauler can access them to pick them up. And then our labeling guidelines have a few extra pieces to them in addition to the St. Louis Park guidelines. So we also ask that things have images, and we have a minimum size as well. So 8.5 by 11 is the minimum size for carts. So like this image, they each have 8.5 by 11 on them. For a dumpster, a traditional, more like 4-yard dumpster that is most common, the minimum size is actually a poster size, so 11 by 17. And then if you are one of those properties that has even larger containers, or if you have a very large, say like a recycling or cardboard compactor, then we also require an even larger size of that as well. We ask that things be color coded. So recycling labels should be mainly blue. Trash labels should be mainly red, gray, or black. And if you have organics, those labels should be mainly green. And again, this is something where we're not necessarily asking that you just create something on your own, but you could work with haulers to see what they have. we have labels available as well, and I'll go over that later too. And then we have the same uh, um, delineation of responsibilities. So haulers are the ones responsible to label their carts and dumpsters. But we also ask that property managers are responsible for labeling any containers that you own. So any containers inside the building, community spaces, things like that. And it would fall under the same color code, have images, and be at least 8.5 by 11. And then we have some service level requirements. So this is that we want to ensure adequate service. We want to make sure that carts and bins aren't consistently overflowing. And because we know that sometimes that can result in charges from the hauling company, but it also can result in residents not being able to recycle. If they bring their recycling out and the bin is already overflowing, then that recycling is just going to end up in the trash. So we want to make sure we're capturing that. And when we talk about increasing service levels to meet the requirement, that doesn't necessarily mean you just need to get more carts or more dumpsters. Sometimes that is what that means, but sometimes it's just increasing the pickup frequency. Maybe your recycling is getting picked up once a week and it needs to start getting picked up twice a week, and that would solve that issue.
The next thing we want to talk about are the kind of tips on, or the what can be recycled and why it matters. And we did a more in-depth workshop for residents last week that we recorded, and I can share that with you all once it's on YouTube. I'll send the link out to all property managers so that you can share that with your residents as well. We're going to do kind of an abbreviated version of that today. And I'm actually going to have Caitlin start with a little bit of why it's important to recycle, and then a few things about how to teach residents about prepping recyclables, or what overarching things that don't go in the containers.
All right. Okay, so yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important to recycle, right? I'm sure a lot of you have maybe experienced with your haulers being told, oh, that's not allowed anymore, or that can't go in there, or you've received a contamination fee and maybe didn't quite understand why, or it wasn't explained thoroughly to you. So some things that cause issues for recycling can cause safety issues, and that's why they're a problem, like safety issues for the people working at the recycling facilities. Some items just don't work with sorting facilities in the way their operations and their equipment are. And some items are just pure contamination and can contaminate good recycling. So we'll go through a few examples now of what those things might be. So bagged stuff, this is probably the main issue that a lot of you are seeing in your own facilities. So this seems to be one of the hardest habits for people to break, of putting their recycling in plastic bags or putting plastic bags in the recycling themselves. This is an issue because it causes contamination and it's an operational issue. Plastic bags get caught in recycling equipment. People have to shut down the facilities to get those plastic bags out, and they can contaminate good recycling. If something's in a plastic bag, even if it's all aluminum cans, for example, they're going to take that out so that plastic bag doesn't go with the rest of the recycling. So this is a tough habit to break for residents, and the way to kind of break this habit is to consistently educate and push on this and remind people over and over to not bag their recyclables in plastic bags. And sorry, I have a cat who is trying to join the webinar. So, educate on this piece, but also remind people that plastic bags aren't the only option. They can put their recycling in paper bags and dump the paper bag out and then put the bag in the recycling. We also offer reusable tote bags, and they can even use their own reusable bag or bin to dump their recycling out. The optimal way for recycling to be in the cart or dumpster is to be completely loose and no bag at all possible. And the next one we have is tiny stuff. So very small things do not recycle well. Some stuff you can see in this picture is bottle caps, little pieces of paper, little plastic items. And if something, for something to be considered too small, the general idea is to think if it's, some people say smaller than a credit card, some say smaller than your fist, or smaller than 2 by 2 inches. This stuff is a contamination issue. It falls through the cracks of the sorting facility process and ends up contaminating glass. This picture, and Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, this might even be a picture of glass at a sorting facility, but you can't even tell because it's so full of a bunch of other tiny things that fell through the cracks with it.
Yeah, this was from a city sort of our city material, so not multifamily, but of just kind of all the other random things that were left at the end of sort. So the things that were never going to end up, they were going to end up in the glass if they had gone through the system, yes.
Okay, yeah, but yes, so, and this is typically what glass looks like at the end of a recycling sort, initial sort. So what to do with small items? Generally, these should just go in the trash, but we do want to take a note on caps. So a lot of people often have questions about what to do with bottle caps. Generally, when residents ask this question, you can say, if it's the same material, like a plastic cap on a plastic bottle, you can leave the cap on. If it's a different material, like a metal cap on a glass bottle or a plastic cap on a glass bottle, we want to separate those, take the cap off so that the container can be recycled. And our next one is big stuff. So very large items are not recyclable because of their size. First of all, they're very large. They are not meant to go through the recycling sorting process. They need to be handled differently. And often also because of the material type, maybe an unknown type of plastic, or it's a type of plastic that is going to contaminate other plastic recycling. So this one is a little tricky. Sometimes stuff like this should just go in the trash, but another thing to suggest to residents would be first, ask themselves if this really needs to be thrown away, or if is this something that they could fix and use again? Is it something that they could give away or donate to a friend? And stuff like this is a way to suggest, I'll put a plug in for our county Fix-It clinics. We're not having events right now, but we have recently launched virtual Fix-It clinics. So if residents have, a bulky item like this and they're only trying to get rid of it because it's broken, maybe they could work with someone to help them fix it, and then they can get more use out of it before needing to throw it away. And then our last one, I believe, is dirty or full stuff. This issue is contamination. We see it, the super greasy pizza box, the bottles and containers that still have a ton of liquid and food in them. Or how people just love to take a plastic bottle and stuff it full of napkins and wrappers and things like that before putting it in the recycling. These items, when they're full of food and full of additional trash, that's just pure contamination. That's going to contaminate other good recyclables. So when it comes to this type of dirty stuff, the recommendation is to take an extra second, be mindful of what you're putting in the trash. Dump something out if it needs to be dumped out. Consider, is this really recyclable? If it's full of X, Y, or Z. And some people often ask if they need to fully, completely wash their recyclables. And what I say is not everything needs to be completely deep cleaned, but some items, especially peanut butter jars or like salsa jars, do need some additional cleaning and rinsing before going in the recycling. And I believe that's the last one.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. I'm now going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the specific categories about what can and can't be recycled, in case your residents ask that question and want to know what actually they can put in. So the first two categories are paper and plastic, because these tend to be, one, what make up the bulk of recyclables, and two, where things get most confusing because there are so many different things. This slide is about the paper that's okay to put in recycling, and that, yes, these things are all acceptable. Hopefully none of these items are a surprise. Mail, magazines, phone books, if you still get them, cardboard, cereal boxes, things like that. The no category for paper is where things get a little bit more confusing for residents and maybe for yourself. The first thing I want to talk about is shredded paper. And the picture down in the bottom right is actually from a multifamily property that we visited where someone had shredded paper and just dumped the whole thing in there. One, I imagine that this is an operational headache for you all if it gets dumped out on the ground or ends up exploding somewhere else. We definitely don't want it unbagged, but the honest truth is we don't even want it bagged. The last couple of years, the recycling facilities in the Twin Cities Metro have basically said, even if it's in paper bags, it gets smashed open and becomes a big mess of confetti in their facilities and ends up contaminating the glass, as Caitlin showed in that photo. Recycled or shredded paper, unfortunately, the best option for it is the trash. And that isn't what people love to hear. So we always respond by reminding them to just minimize what they actually are shredding and really only stick to the things that actually need to be shredded. Medical, bank, tax documents, financial, personal items, but the magazine covers and the Christmas card envelopes don't need to be recycled or don't need to be shredded. They can just be straight recycled. A few other categories that can be confusing and we often see in our recycling, both in multifamily and commercial, frankly, are facial tissues, paper towels, paper cups and plates, paper egg cartons. Those items are unfortunately either contaminated with different, food, or they're just a really low grade quality of paper. They've already been recycled a number of times and there just isn't any value. Paper plates and cups often have also a plastic line layer that isn't desired in the recycling world. A couple other things are freezer boxes, ice cream tubs, so anything that comes out of the freezer also isn't desired by the recycling community. It just doesn't have any value, which, as much as I like to think about the environmental benefits of recycling, ultimately it's a business and they need to have value in order to be recyclable. And then the last thing is wrapping paper. And this might be something you think about if you have a newsletter or something you can put up, is put a signage that says, hey, before the holidays in the wintertime, to put up a sign that says, hey, just as a reminder, wrapping paper is not recyclable. It's a low grade paper. The other issue is that it's often contaminated with bows and a number of other things or string that get wrapped around the equipment. And it just is not a desirable product in the recycling world. So that might be something you think about doing a specific education campaign, put up signs in your elevators or on your dumpsters a few weeks before, December, maybe around Thanksgiving, so then all the holidays that happen in December are included. Plastic is often the most confusing for folks because we used to just talk about the numbers and now we often talk about the containers and plastics change, and it is confusing. I definitely understand. What I would encourage you here is to simplify the message with your residents. Bottles with lids is what we used to say a lot in the past, but honestly, in a multifamily setting, it probably is one of the simplest. And for those who want to do more, you can definitely provide that information. Those guides will provide those details. But if people just are really struggling with it, it's best to have a few of the right things in versus a lot of the things that shouldn't be. This picture here shows examples of things that are accepted in plastics recycling. Again, Caitlin's comment earlier, things like yogurt containers really do need to be rinsed out. The dairy especially molds a lot. That is really a problem for recycling. Things like shampoo containers don't need to be rinsed out all the way though, because it's just soap. So it's the food that really is the issue. The laundry detergent and shampoo just need to be empty. The plastics category that are the no's and where we see the most contamination, again, plastic bags. This includes bags that are used to bag recyclables, but also just free bags or film. Somebody gets a case of sodas and all that plastic wrap that's around it. While it could be taken to a grocery store for recycling, most of those programs are back up and running now, Target, Cub, others, it cannot be recycled in regular recycling because of that issue of wrapping around the equipment. The other big thing we often see is plastic utensils. Unfortunately, they're often made of a plastic that's doesn't have any demand, but they move through the system in a different way and just can't be sorted correctly. Plastic tubes like toothpaste and shampoo tubes that you get, the squeezable kind of containers cannot be recycled this way, and anything styrofoam. Here is a picture of a styrofoam cup, but this also includes any sort of styrofoam packaging like electronics come in. None of that is recyclable through anyone in the Twin Cities, any of the regular recycling haulers, so that should not go in mixed recycling. Don't try to read all this right now. I will definitely provide the slides, but I wanted to just note that if folks ask, or if you're curious about what plastics numbers can be recycled, this is a very brief summary of that. The number is an indicator of the type of plastic from which the item is made. The arrows around it, unfortunately, look like the recycling arrows, but they're not. They adopted that symbol decades ago, and unfortunately, it has stuck around. The numbers that we can recycle in our region are 1, 2, 4, and 5, and that is fairly universal in the Twin Cities metro. That I say fairly because, you know, unfortunately things change, but for right now, that is pretty universal. So depending on, or no matter who your hauler is here in St. Louis Park, those numbers should be fine. 3, 6, and 7 should always be the trash. So if you wanted to put up a sign along those lines, that's not on the signage from the county, you wanted to add that or send that out in an e-newsletter to your residents or paper newsletter, that would be some guidance you could provide if people want that information. Metal, fortunately, most food containers can be recycled. As long as they're clean and emptied, they can go in the recycling. Beverage cans, cookie tins, things like that. Metal that can't be recycled is largely for safety reasons. One, things like propane tanks are explosive, but other things like pipe and other shelving, unfortunately, those become very dangerous in recycling sorting facilities, and we really don't want to see them. It's hard to see in the bottom right corner. This is from a single family home sort, but in the middle underneath that paint roller is actually a circular saw blade. We definitely do not want things like that. That becomes very dangerous in the sorting facility. Those items can be recycled. They can go to scrap metal recyclers. So if you would wanted to consider putting out a separate container by your recycling dumpster that your management staff, if it was in the capacity time-wise to do, you could take to recycler. Here in St. Louis Park, we don't have any but Express Metals just nearby in Hopkins, takes a lot of different scrap. That might be a way that you could deal with some of the materials that you might be seeing. Some of these items like paint rollers, you probably don't see in apartments, but maybe scraped pots and pans. Those items definitely can be recycled, but just not in your regular recycling. So that's something to think about, is providing an alternate container where you could acknowledge that those items do have somewhere else to go. The propane tanks, I'll just mention, the county drop-off facilities do take the small ones, the camping size ones, but not the large ones. The large ones, I'm guessing most multifamily don't have, unless you've got first floor porches and or access, ground floor access. Those, if you have this as an issue, please contact me and I can provide you the name of a company where folks can take those if they're not just exchanging them. For glass, similar to metal, most food and beverage containers that you buy at the store and come filled with items can be recycled. Everything on the left there. The part where glass becomes a problem is when people try to recycle drinkware. So this wine glass breaks and you just put it in the recycling. Unfortunately, while it may look fairly similar, this type of glass is different than the glass of the wine bottle. And it melts at a different temperature, it may have different things added, and so it actually creates a contaminant because when they try to process that glass, it doesn't mix with the rest of the glass correctly. So we want to make sure that those items very much go in the trash. Of course, if they're not broken, it's great to encourage people to donate them. Dishes, mirrors, and windows also cannot be recycled. So if you're ever doing remodeling projects and you're replacing windows, please don't ever put that glass. If somebody breaks the window, that can't go in your recycling. That needs to go in the trash. And finally, we have cartons. So this would be milk cartons or shelf-stable items like the soups and things. If these are clean, again, they can all be recycled. We would ask you, we don't want straws in the little juice boxes, but otherwise, as long as they're empty, they're fine. I do want to point out a few other problem materials that we see in recycling and I imagine show up in multifamily buildings as well. One of the number one things is batteries, and this is a safety issue. Batteries are highly flammable, especially when they get put in a garbage truck that then compacts that material, and those lithium batteries in particular can be highly explosive and cause fires. The same thing when they get to the sorting facility. So those do need to be properly recycled. The county drop-off facilities do take most batteries, and so you can look on their website for more information on that. A few other things, sharps and needles. This is a safety issue. It's actually illegal to put them in the recycling. Sometimes, unfortunately, people will put them in a laundry detergent container and someone else in the household will not realize that and put the whole thing in the recycling. And this is really dangerous. Those containers can come open on the line when people are sorting, and it just becomes a huge problem. Hennepin County has a really nice resource on medications and needles disposal and a number of things on their website as well if people have questions and need proper disposal. String lights and electrical cords, again, these can be recycled through scrap metal, but definitely not in regular recycling. Multi-layer packaging like that Capri Sun, where it's a mix of foil and plastic, not recyclable, and snack bags and wrappers. So the chip bags, granola bar wrappers, these are all trash. I wanted to do a few slides here to comment on addressing common problems. We recognize, again, that multifamily has a number of challenges that are different than a single family home setup, but wanted to just acknowledge a few of those, and I'm happy to provide more one-on-one if people have more specific issues. So contamination, we have spent a lot of time just in the last few minutes talking about what is and isn't contamination. And the thing is that the haulers are charging fines now. They didn't used to do as much of this, but because of changes in the international recycling world, the haulers are charging, and sometimes they're quite large, and enough charges adds up to quite a lot sometimes. So it is really in your financial interest to decrease recycling as much as possible. Now, those of you in condo associations, this might be an easier message because your residents are going to pay this in their association fees. Those of you who manage multifamily properties that aren't condos, it might be a little bit trickier. But it's something to maybe just help people say, like, this will come back eventually as a cost in your rent or in your dues because we have to pay for this contamination if it continues to happen. Again, that will sit differently with different multifamily populations. As I mentioned previously, we really encourage you to simplify the message to your residents. If there's, a top 10 list, which I actually have a top 10 list, that would be really easy to provide. Like, here's the things you should always recycle and just don't worry about the rest. If you've got a group of residents for whom that type of messaging would be easier, let me know, and I'm happy to provide that resource. Another thought, and this isn't done super frequently, but it's something to think about, is incorporating recycling into your lease. We all know that not everyone reads every line of every lease, right? But it's a place to consider. Putting it in there and acknowledging from the very beginning that residents are required to recycle and required to not be contaminating the recycling. There are models for this. There is the model or language for this. If you would like to see that, I can definitely help with that as well. Another idea is hosting a workshop. Right now, I can't do them in person, but most of the time, I'm happy to come and present to your residents at any time and give a presentation very similar to this, focused toward residents. We did, like I mentioned, do the digital one, the virtual one last week, and you'll have that at your disposal. But if you would ever like an in-person workshop in the future, let me know. A couple of things, overflowing dumpsters. Caitlin touched on this a bit. Again, increasing your service can help address this. So then you don't have issues of stuff coming out everywhere and then people just add to that as a problem. Separating your cardboard can really help. It does that a lot of folks. So then that's not taking up all, you have a couple of boxes and it takes up the entire dumpster. Having a separate place for cardboard, if you have space for it, and acknowledging and having additional signage requiring that it to be flattened, it can help in some communities. Hennepin County does have some cardboard specific signage that could go on a dumpster just like that. Another issue that we hear about is illegal dumping. And unfortunately, my answer is there's not a whole lot the city can do about this. We get it in our parks. The city is dealing with illegal dumping all the time. Unfortunately, it is something that some individuals just engage in, and it's difficult to do a whole lot. A few things I would recommend if they are in the realm of possibility for your facility is to install security cameras so you can at least catch license plate numbers. If you can provide that information to the city, to the police department, they can follow up on that. Without cameras or some sort of documentation, it's impossible really to do that. The other thing is physical screening. If you can hide your containers at all so they're just not as visible from the street, this is really useful. It makes it so the person who's driving around at the end of the month trying to figure out what to do with that mattress that they can't take with them doesn't see your container as the first option. So that is something, if you've got the ability to do that, or getting it just out of the sight of the main streets can be a helpful thing. One thing I just want to mention, we do have, and I just realized this should say chapter 22, section 25.5 is where we talk about illegal dumping that is illegal. And so it can be addressed by the St. Louis Park Police Department if you have documentation. A few resources I want to share that I haven't, some I've already mentioned and some I have not. There is our website that's dedicated to multifamily recycling. The ordinance language is all there. Those recycling guides are there. The information about your requirement of how much recycling you need is all there. There's also information more directed towards residents, so you will see that all there. But I encourage you to utilize that website yourself, refer your residents to it. We also have the Park Perspective, which is a quarterly newsletter. Hopefully you have seen that, and either it goes directly to your residents or you're putting it in their mailboxes. One thing I would really encourage you to do is make sure every resident gets that. We try to provide regular articles about recycling, and in the one that is coming out here very soon, this recycling guide will actually be included. We decided we wanted to get that to all residents, just to have another opportunity for education. And so we decided to do it in the Park Perspective, so even your residents will get the guide this year. So make sure that those get to folks in their mailboxes. I also have a multifamily e-newsletter. This is primarily geared toward residents, but you're more than welcome to sign up. Let me know if you would like to be added to that list. I send that about quarterly. The city does social media posts on recycling, and especially around contamination associated with different times of the year, things like that. We also offer a multifamily organics drop site, which is for food waste. This is something we started a few years ago because we had residents asking about what they could do with their food waste, and we wanted to provide an opportunity recognizing that organics is just not realistic for many multifamily buildings. A few do offer it, but we wanted to provide an opportunity. The drop sites are definitely not an option for everyone. It doesn't work for everybody's life, but it is an option. And we have 5 of those in the summer and 4 in the winter. And that information is on that website as well. The other thing I wanted to mention is if any of your residents are particularly enthusiastic about recycling, we do have a program called Recycling Champions. This is where we train residents to learn about recycling and how they can be peer educators. And sometimes those residents, and taking advantage of that enthusiasm, it can be a challenge sometimes to manage that, but use that to your advantage. Help them help you and educate their peers in the building. And if they want to join the Recycling Champions program so they have more tools to do that, you can definitely refer them to me and I'll get them signed up. Last thing, as I mentioned, is workshops and events, which of course this year is basically on hold, but happy to work with you in the future if you would like something. I'm going to transfer back to Caitlin here for a second to let her have a chance to share.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about additional resources that Hennepin County has to offer. Emily's going to have a lot of this stuff too, but just a quick overview, we have, and I'll cover more of these in more detail. We have reusable tote bags, as you can see pictured here, for people to take their recycling down. We also provide recycling guides and additional educational printed materials. We have pre-made labels and signs for dumpsters and waste areas and carts. We can also offer a few options for in-person or at this, at this time, virtual technical assistance and presentations and outreach. And we do have some grants available as well that I can talk about. So I just want to highlight the tote bag. This is an incredibly popular resource that people request. It's it's an easy way to tackle plastic bag contamination and recycling. If your property has a lot of issues with people bringing their recycling down in plastic bags, providing this reusable bag can be a good option to address that. We do have our printed educational materials. As Emily's already mentioned, we have a lot of translated versions as well. So in addition to English, Spanish, and Russian, as you see here, we also have Hmong, Somali, Lao, Thai, Oromo, of like a ton of different languages. Obviously not every language, but hopefully we can address whatever languages are present in your property. In addition to recycling guides, we have other printed material too that's available. We have guides about what to do with bulky waste. We have, as I mentioned before, our How to Get Rid of It guide that has information about hazardous waste and how to dispose of that. We even have guides specific to donations, to what to do with medical supplies and sharps and things. All these, I should have mentioned this initially, but all these tote bags, these guides, everything I'm going to talk about is available for free. This is all at no cost to anybody. This is just things that we want to provide to you to help make your program successful. These are a few images of the signs and labels that we have available. So as you can see, the trash label is gray. It says trash as an icon. The recycling label is blue and has image pictures of what should go in the recycling. To the right, we have our recycling poster. And one thing that's handy about this poster is at the bottom it says containers are located, where you can write on the poster where your recycling containers are located in the building. And this is a handy thing to put, I see them in elevators a lot, in entryways, bulletin boards, things like that. And also just back to the signs, just a reminder that we have these in multiple sizes available. And then we can also provide some technical assistance. So I'm not really able to come out right now, but in the past and hopefully in the future, we'll be able to come to your property and do a site visit and look at your setup and help you figure out what's going to work best and be easiest for your residents, help you get signs and labels put up in a way that's both informative and also not too overwhelming for people. We can do presentations and we can do virtual presentations for residents. I seek to be a resource to you. We'll be giving out our contact information at the end of this presentation, but myself and Emily, we're always people that you can come to and ask questions and ask for support and reach out to at any time. And we also, the county has grants available to, mainly to help properties start organics recycling. But if you're a property that's really struggling with recycling and you need to get some internal recycling containers, that's something that the grants would apply to as well. And I do just, need to highlight, we do have limitations right now because of COVID-19. So a lot of the site visits and mailing and delivery of resources is currently on hold. But we are working really hard to try to get some safety protocols put into place so that we can start getting these resources out to you once again. As well as trying to put up a bunch of downloadable resources. So right now you can go to the St. Louis Park Multifamily website and download a few of the recycling guides and other educational pieces. And hopefully soon we'll have a site on the county website that will include all our educational pieces as well as some signs that you can just download as a PDF and print and use as you need. So that will hopefully be coming soon. But we can do virtual presentations right now, and we can still connect via phone or email. Try to make some kind of video conferencing work and maybe do a virtual site visit, and you can still apply for grants right now. And I do also want to emphasize Emily's point about utilizing your residents as resources, I can almost guarantee that there's somebody in one of your buildings who really cares about recycling, really wants to make it better, and maybe they're already a recycling champion, or they're a Hennepin County master recycler, or they're going to be. Um, those people can be really great champions for improving recycling at your property. And I just highly recommend reaching out to those people and working with your residents. Because we have seen that sometimes what people need to hear isn't just the information coming from management, they need to hear it coming from their neighbor or from their friend. So just to highlight a few websites, Hennepin County website, if you don't want to remember this, if you just go to hennepin.us and you search apartments or multifamily, the website will come up, and that has all of all the information we've gone over today, as well as links to the Ordinance 13. And that is where our where you will be able to request recycling resources as well as on that page. The Green Disposal Guide is a good website to share with your residents. It's a quick and easy tool for someone to search for a specific item and what they should do with it. And so yeah, that's my contact info, but I'm gonna actually turn this off and send it back to Lily.
Thank you, Caitlin. Really appreciate that. One thing I will add, are you still doing your multifamily property managers e-newsletter quarterly or so?
We do still have a newsletter. It's been on hold for the past couple of months, but normally it is monthly.
Monthly, okay.
Yeah, so if you go to that apartments website on the Hennepin County website, you can sign up to be back on that newsletter, and that'll hopefully get back up again soon as well. And that is geared more towards property managers.
Yeah, and I get that myself just because I find it to be a really nice newsletter, and sometimes I share that with property managers. I would encourage you all to sign up for it directly. I can send that link out for signing up, that information, when we send out a follow-up on this on the webinar. All right, I have looked here at the questions and I don't see anything. I'm just going to throw up my presentation here. Since I'm not seeing any questions, I think I'll just leave this for a minute. We are right at 10 o'clock, and so I want to stay on track. I really appreciate everybody's time today. As I mentioned, this is recorded, and we will share it with folks when it is ready. I'll have a link that I can share you right away, but then we'll do some editing and get it up on YouTube. We'll share with the wider multifamily property managers audience. So thank you again for your time. Always feel free to follow up with myself or Caitlin, and we're happy to support you in improving recycling in your buildings. Thanks so much and have a great day.